So what we're going to do today is we're going to make the connection and try to show you how education probably isn't fair to everybody. And we already know that, right? Coming in, we know that we're not silly to the point where we don't know those things, but it's important to show that. And I'm going to point out today, at least from a cultural perspective, how it's sort of failed a lot of people. Now, it hasn't failed you because you're here. So the very fact that you're here tells me that the education system has worked pretty well for you, right? Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't make it this far. And that's good. I'm glad that it did. But the other side of the coin is that it doesn't work for everybody. Education isn't for everybody. I used to sort of prescribe people to try to seek out a college education, but I came to realize fairly quickly that that's just plain not what everybody wants. And that's good. I think that you should do what you want in life. I don't care, not for everybody. It is for some people, though, who it just doesn't seem to fit. And the fact that education doesn't work for people tells us that that it needs to be adjusted in some way. It needs to be rethought about, instituted in some way. We have to make room for those who want to be in education, who education hasn't worked for so far, right? So when I was in third grade, just a little tyke, I fell in love with my third grade teacher. And I'm not kidding. This was a serious, serious love affair. I used to sit in class and get stuff wrong on purpose just so she'd come over to me and lean down next to me and I could smell her hair. It was Aquanet hairspray. I can still smell it today. Her perfume still radiates with me sometimes. I thought she was everything in third grade. And I had plans to marry her. We were going to have between, 17 and 26 children. We were going to live in a nice house. We were going to have a picket fence, nice station wagon, and we were just going to have everything. Barbecues in the backyard. Everything was going to be perfect with Miss Schultz. Then one day we were sitting in the classroom, not that much unlike this one. We had rows of desks. Remember the old days when we sat in rows of desks? And I was sitting right by the window, and there was even a ledge there, sort of similar to what we have set up in here. And just then, the door opened, and Mr. Anderson came in, and following Mr. Anderson were all of the people that were in his class. They all filed in, and they all found a place to sit. And it was kind of cool, because I saw some of my friends there, and they were, hey, Gary, hey, how you doing, man? And all that kind of thing. And they all sat down, and I asked them, I said, what, you know what we're in here? And they said, I don't have a clue why we're in here. Then the door opened again, and this unbelievably good teacher, Mrs. Pappenfuss, she came walking in with her whole class, and her whole class sat down, and some more buddies of mine came in. It was kind of nice, because I figured, yeah, now we can screw around or something, you know. But wasn't to be the case. We all sat there wondering what we were doing there. And all of a sudden, Mr. Anderson, and he was a great teacher because he played the drums. Everybody loved the teacher who played the drums, right? During choir, they'd bring him in, he'd set up a little snare drum, and it was really cool. And he kind of wanted to make me play the drums all the time too, which that would have been cool too. Opportunity missed, but would have been cool. And he read off a list of names from a clipboard that he was holding. And then he looked at everybody and he said, everybody whose name I read off, stand up and follow me. And everybody was like confused, follow him. And everybody stood up whose name was read and followed him out. And they went to his classroom. And then Mrs. Pappenfuss got up and she walked in and she read a list of names. And everybody whose name was read from that list got up and followed her out of the classroom. And I'm thinking, man, geez, I didn't get to go anywhere. I looked around and some of the people that came from some of the other classrooms were still there and so on and so forth. And it's like, they kind of mixed us up. And This is where my love affair ended. So I was sitting over on the side, and Mrs. Schultz was standing by the window. And I still remember it today. It was a nice kind of aqua chiffon dress that I had imagined many times I'd bought her for her birthday. And she leaned over to her student teacher and she said, and I quote, I remember it perfectly today, "It looks like I have the dummies again." And I looked up and I said, "What? What's she talking about?" Then it dawned on me what she was talking about. And what happened is she went up to the front of the class just to make sure we were all there, read everybody's name, and because Nancy Anderson had left, Tom Bechtold had left, and my good friend Johnny Brockett had left as well, she read down the list, and my name, starting with a C, was the first one read, and lo and behold, that made me think that I was like king of the donuts. And I looked around and I noticed something. I noticed that the 3 Indian kids in the school, me being one of them, were in there, and also 2 African American kids were in there. And then there was a bunch of other kids, a few of whom were just screw-ups. I knew it, right? One of them tried to break into the milk machine down in the cafeteria one time to steal money. I thought that was kind of gutsy, but not very smart, you know what I mean? And what happened that day was we were sort of segregated. Those smart kids, quote unquote, they got up and they left early with Mr. Anderson. And they went into a different room and they studied the same things that we studied, except they studied them sort of fast. And they got some extra help in there and so on and so forth, and did a pretty good job. That was that really bright group of kids. We all know kids like that, kids that don't have to try. Everything she does, she succeeds at. Then there was that middle group, the group that went with Mrs. Pappenhuis. Those are the kids that you're going to see this when you have conferences. Well, you know, Bobby could do better, he could do worse, he messes around a little bit, but we're not going to worry about Bobby right now because he's doing fine. If anything comes up, we'll let you know, otherwise, let's just sort of leave him alone, right? And you guys are probably some of those, I'm assuming. Then there was the next group, right? And I was in that group. And we were the group that we did the same stuff, but we went a lot slower than the other kids. So, if you're in the slow group for reading, you're going to be in the slow group for math, you're going to be in the slow group for social studies and everything else, right? Makes sense. So that first group, they were working their tails off through school, and by the end of 3rd grade, they were doing 4th grade stuff, just about all of them. And some of them were well into their 4th grade stuff. Makes sense, right? We've all seen that. That second group, they were right where they should be, some a little bit higher, some a little bit lower, but we're not going to worry about it because they're right there. And God forbid we ruin their educational career by taking them and putting them in a different place, right? That last group, we were right about halfway through our 3rd grade stuff when the year ended. Holy crap. We didn't even get done. These other groups, they're like ahead of us. Then 4th grade started. This group, that top group, holy buckets, some of those were actually doing some 6th grade stuff. I heard a term called geometry coming from one of those people, Burns or something. Then I figured out, no, that was German. So they're up here, they're for the most part in the 5th grade, some of them in the 6th grade, some of them dabbling into some, maybe 7th, junior. That second group, right where they should be. Could do better, could do worse. Our group, we were just finishing 3rd grade. Uh-oh. All right, 5th grade here. That first group, they're far ahead of everybody else. They finished the curriculum for their K-5 system or K-6 system, and this was a junior high school district, not a middle school district, which I happen to like. So that group was right where they should be, and they're ready to take the test. They're ready to kill the world and all that kind of stuff, right? That middle group, they're doing stuff. They're keeping right on track, right where they should be, and everything else. We were halfway through the 4th grade stuff. See where this is going? So every year we lost a half a year. Now on top of that, we had summer break. Now, a lot of people don't like it when I say this, but I'm a huge proponent of year-round school. I really am. I wouldn't mind having a little time off in the winter to head south. See what I'm saying? And it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense because we don't lose that 1/3 of the ground throughout the summer. Academically, you always lose some ground, right? But you don't lose that much. So then, 7th grade, something happens right here. We're just not there. We've never seen some of the material that they're going to be testing us on. They're standards tests, right? So when we take these at the end of 6th grade to show us what we're going to do in 7th and 8th grade, junior high. Junior high, by the way, is a social. They're social years, right? And we're going to be talking about that as we go, because that's when things start happening. Junior high is when cliques start to form. You remember, don't you? Uh-huh. Boys start to notice girls. Girls start to ignore boys. You start not liking your parents so well. All of that stuff. It's a natural phenomenon, right? You remember. Sure. You don't remember? Okay. So at the end of that year, we take those tests. Those tests will determine kind of where we're going to be in junior high. So our placement in junior high is not going to be conducive to a high academic expectation. You follow me? And because of that, we're going to be placed in courses that aren't going to push us in junior high. And they didn't. So you take these 7th and 8th grade, junior high, but if you weren't prepared to go here, and if you didn't get what you needed here, you're not going to be placed very well here. Based on the test scores that you got here, and who's going to get the best test scores here? Is it Mr. Anderson's group or Mrs. Pappenfuss's group? Of course. Who's going to get the worst? Mr. Pappenfuss or Miss Schultz? Absolutely. So you're following me. You're tracking me. As they say about my dog, he's tracking me. Anyway, that first group, high expectations. They're going to put that first group in a lot of advanced classes if they can, right? So, they're going to really have a lot of academic opportunity, right? That second group, what's going to happen with them? Well, they're doing fine. That first group, they got chances to go to places like Harvard, Ivy League schools all over the place, really good top level schools. That middle group, or that next group down, not too bad, right? University of Minnesota, maybe USD, New Mexico, UCLA, places like that. Good places to go to school, good places to get an education, quite frankly. And I'm going to tell you this little secret. I've been around education a long time. The education that you get up here versus down here is pretty much the same. Surprise, surprise, right? Down here, well, it's not so bad, right? Down here you got a chance to go to community college, right? That's the kind of track, vocational technical schools, right? Nothing wrong with that. A lot of my friends went through that system and doing better than I am today, at least financially, and are happier than me, I can guarantee you that. Not too bad. When I was back then, there was no expectation that I would ever achieve anything. I don't even know where that came from, but it came from someplace. I didn't want it that way. That's what it was. Junior year of high school, I missed 57 days of school. Couldn't stand it. Absolutely couldn't stand it. But not conducive to success in life, right? I did better my senior year. I only missed 37, so that wasn't too bad. 37 days. So, this is the way it was set up. And I can tell you that I believe, and I still believe today, that there was no way that I was ever going to succeed in the system. It just was not going to happen. And even today, I want to know what happened back here. How come I was in that class? I have an idea why I was in that class. So, I graduate from high school and end up having to get married and had a family, all of this kind of stuff at a very, very early age. I took 2 years out of school. I woke up one morning and didn't have any gifts for my kids. After Christmas vacation, I walked down and got myself enrolled at the university, and the rest is kind of history, right? But before that happened, my mother wanted to find out what was wrong with me, right? So she took me down to the university, and we spent 2 days taking a whole barrage of different tests. And over that 2 days, we stayed at a nice hotel with a swimming pool and a hot tub and all that kind of stuff. It was sort of fun, right? And we had a lot of stuff paid for, and it was pretty cool. At the end of that time period, we just went home. I at least forgot about it. Well, a couple weeks later, I came in the back door of my house, and I was looking down, and my shoes were muddy. I remember that, so I was taking my shoes off, and I looked up. What was that about? So I went up there, and I looked at the envelope, and my name was on there, too. It's like, oh, what's that about? So I picked up the letter, and my name was on there, too. So I read the letter. It was very, very interesting, because over the succession of those 2 days, I had taken a lot of tests and stuff, IQ tests, and my score came back and told me that I was in the top 0.002% in the entire world. I had no idea what the words IQ even meant. I didn't know what anything in that letter meant at that point in time. So I took the letter back to my room. I didn't think it even sounded good at the time. I didn't know. Was this out of 500? So I took it to school. And I went in to one of my teachers, who was always my favorite teacher. And I went in and sat down, and I handed him the letter, and he said, "Hey, what do you got there, Gary?" I said, "Well, this letter came. It's about those tests that I took. What does this mean?" So we closed the door, and we talked about it, and he said, "This doesn't surprise me," he said. I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "I've seen you in school. You can't even focus. You can't, nothing got to you. And there's reasons for that." It's like, well, we didn't get into it then. And we plain didn't have enough time, right? I probably wouldn't have understood it anyway. But, fast forwarding again, I'm back in my first semester in college. It went okay. I got C's, right? So he used to hang the test scores on the wall of people when they took tests, right? And you picked your own little number, and nobody could identify it. You know what I'm talking about. Do they do that here? They don't do that here? No. They do it every place else, just to let you know. So I'm standing there, and I'm watching these guys, and they're going down to their number, and they're going across, and they're saying, "Oh, hey." And I looked at them, and a bunch of them did that. And I looked at mine, and mine was like a C. It's like, what the hell am I doing wrong? I can't figure this out. Well, it turns out that in this auditorium class, I used to sit here, and there were rows of people, right? Rows going around, and I used to listen to the people in back of me talk. And the only thing they seemed to talk about was how hammered they got the night before. How come they're going out and getting drunk? Should I be going out and getting drunk? I don't know. And I'm sitting here trying to do my best. I studied right up until the test, all kinds of stuff, over them and over them and over them again, and I'm getting C's. I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? So that's when I went and talked to the professor, and he told me about an author I ought to read. So I read it, and it's like, holy crap. I think I'm beginning to understand this. Some people learn differently than others. That was the phrase that I'm telling you right now changed my life in some ways. Now here's the thing. I went back to school to be a lawyer. And shortly after that, I realized like, this isn't going to happen. Because you got to read like 600-700 pages a night. So I started doing things differently. I just tried a couple things. And I'm not going to recommend you do this, but this is, I'll tell you what I did. I stopped studying. Oh, here you what? Because I realized that what I was over-studying is what I was doing. I was studying right up until the time of the test, and any new material I took in within that time period messed me up. Where does this fit with what I know? Then I started doing something else. I was watching PBS one day, and I stumbled on this thing on TV, and it had to do with coloring books. And doodling, right? How many people in here doodle in class? Very, very effective teaching tool and learning tool because it activates both sides of your brain, which I'm going to get to in just a second. So I began to think about what's this IQ thing about, and I began to think about why I wasn't doing well, and then I began to read these articles, and when I combined everything, I came to realize that I just didn't learn like these other people learned. It was that simple. So I had to figure out how I learned. Taking note cards and pressing things into my head over and over and over again until I memorize them, that ain't gonna work. That's just not gonna work for me. And I know that some of you in here study that way. I know you do. But nobody ever really taught any of us how to study, right? In high school. It wasn't a class. You were expected to figure it out, right? So I stopped studying. I took the notes in the class, I read them once, I read the book stuff, and then I put it away. And I thought, I knew I was onto something. So I started to really delve into it. I began taking courses about it. I began to take things like neuro-linguistic programming, body language. I'm always watching body language in here, always. Watching facial expressions, watching what your hands are doing. I'll go back to the office and write some of this stuff down and about some of you, right? Surprise, surprise. So I began to figure it out. And I actually got hooked up with another person, and we did a paper on it. Started learning about this stuff. Over the course of 4 years, we did a lot of work, man. We figured it out. We figured out that culturally, people learn differently. I know that there's cultural differences in learning, and I know that there's certain cultures that are not addressed in schools, the K-12 system. And I'm going to tell you, I just don't think people know how. I don't think that people were taught that very long. And don't forget, I came up through the 60s, right? So, my education took place a long time ago, and I'm going to tell you right now, they didn't know anything about this stuff. I mean, they might have been thinking about it, there might have been pockets of it, but it hasn't been as open and clear as it is now. So, that's been probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm here today, right there. So I gathered all this information up and I made a nice presentation and took it to a very high-level person at a major university and did this presentation. Knew this person very, very well. Very well. Went through the whole presentation. They had the opportunity to really take this university to a new level in terms of teaching people diversity and teaching diverse people. And we're sitting in his office, and I went through all of the stuff. Took me about 90 minutes to get through it. I thought I nailed it, man. Nailed it. He was silent the whole time. And I looked at him and said, "Makes a lot of sense." And he said, "Oh yeah." And I said, "Gosh, I think we figured something out." And he looked at me and says, "I think you did too, Gary." And then I said, "Do you think we can do that here?" And he crossed his arms and leaned back and said, "No." took my breath away. It really took I was stunned, like somebody hit me in the stomach. No. And this is what he said. And this was the insult of my life, and I've been insulted a lot. He said, Gary, I'd like to do this, but the world is going to need ditch diggers too. Do you know what he just said there? He said that Indian people should be relegated to being ditch diggers. And he sat back, and he was just glaring at me. I was glaring at him. I couldn't believe what I heard. I sat in that chair for what seemed like 2 hours. It was actually probably 30 seconds. And we just looked at each other. I could not believe he said that. I was stunned. So I packed up my flipboards and walked out. Couldn't believe it. Wow. So the interesting thing about all that is it's very clear that there are differences in learning. Very clear. And I think a lot of those differences are culturally inherent. I don't think there's any question about it. By the way, I think that women learn differently than men. And I would argue that that gives women a disadvantage in the classroom, based on the stereotypes that have happened over the course of their K-12 system. In fact, there's a lot of evidence out there that says exactly that. So, that brings us to you. As teachers, one of the things that you're going to have to come to terms with is teaching people from diverse cultures. We're not going backwards. We're going to have to continue to do that. Because by law, everybody's entitled to an equal opportunity at education. Title VI is federal law, which, by the way, supersedes state law and requires that diversity be taught in the schools. Why? Because everybody deserves the opportunity, if you're a citizen of this country or not, if you're here learning, to get an equal education. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Part of the way that you do that is you include them in your curriculum. In South Dakota, where Lakota is 12% of the people. To do that, how are Lakota people going to feel about themselves? Well, let's go back a ways. Growing up here, I never saw myself as anything but a loser, because that's what the history books told me, the mainstream history books. They said that all the time. They said it in many different ways, in many different forms, but they said it to me all the time. I was the enemy, being a Native person. I never saw anything positive. Anything. We were the wagon burners who circled the wagon trains and shot arrows at everybody, and we were guilty until proven innocent, and we were never proven innocent. We were the drunks, the uneducable, the people that we had to put in certain schools called boarding schools, which ruined our culture. Boarding schools where we were supposed to have the Indians stripped out of us, and we were supposed to come out of the other end as little white kids. We were taken from our mother's arms, literally, ripped from our mother's arms, and forbidden to see our families, sometimes for years and years and years. That wasn't my case, but it was my ancestors' case and very close relatives' case. I never saw a movie where I was a good guy. I was always the bad guy. So after a while, guess how I started to think of myself? As the bad guy. As the worthless native person. Couldn't succeed at anything. Whose family were nothing but drunks. And that kind of thing. So having these mainstream textbooks only in the classroom, that's what it taught me. Was it true? No, far from it. Nobody in my family at that time even drank. That's a really misguided stereotype. I have seen more drinking in the small towns of South Dakota than I've ever seen in any reds. My God. I kid you not. But we began to think of ourselves that way. We began to hate ourselves. And when you hate yourself, it makes you very, very angry. And there are many ways to deal with anger. Some of them not so good. My brother and I used to fight. Why? Because people would call us things like prairie niggers and wagon burners. And they used to sing that song, 10 little Injuns, all gonna die. Walking down the street, covered in pie, all kinds of stuff. I was called about every name you could possibly think of. And every time it was said, it hurt even more. How do we get it to stop? The teachers aren't going to stop it. You got to learn how to fight. You got to learn how to defend yourself. You got to try to carve out a piece of dignity for yourself, no matter what it takes. Luckily, I was saved by a boxing coach. You can't continue to be second-class citizens. Because that's not conducive to a good education. It's not even conducive to people who aren't Indian. To not teach the truth is to teach a lie. If you don't have these things in your curriculum, you're lying by omission. You're also forcing teachers to think about their own moral and ethical standards. Because if they're forced to not teach diversity, they're going to be forced to lie. Is that something the teachers want on their conscience? So that was hammered in, 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 to the point where you just can't take it anymore. In retrospect, when I look back at my junior and senior years of high school, I'm looking at the effects of all of that hammering. I just couldn't stand to be in school anymore. It just wasn't going to work. So I went on and made up my mind that I was going to get everything that it took in order to be a success. And I wasn't necessarily just doing it for myself. I had to be the one in our family to say enough. I had to do it. If I wanted my kids to go to college, I had to do it. I had to go. If I wanted my kids to succeed, then I had to succeed. I had to break the mold. I had to become a success in some way. I had to. In fact, I had to become a success in multiple ways. There was no way that I was going to fail my kids. That was the first thing that I thought of in the morning, the last thing I thought of at night. It wasn't going to happen, no matter what it took. And throughout my college years, and I had a lot of them, throughout my college years, man, I had to struggle, claw, scratch, stay up night after night after night when everybody else was nice and cozy in their beds, work multiple jobs at the same time, all of that stuff. And I don't want you feeling sorry for me, by the way. That's not what this is about. I'm just telling you that I had to do that. Now I'm going to change that phrase, and I'm going to say that that's something that I wanted to do. I didn't have to do anything, but I was not going to fail. So I graduated with my first degree, graduated with my second degree in political science, my third degree in education, my master's degree in social justice and education. I got an education in my doctorate degree, and I got all kinds of other crap in between there. And I never opened a single diploma until I was done. As I knew myself. If I would have opened that bachelor's degree, that might have been good enough. Nope, ain't gonna do it. So when the day came, it was pretty cool, because I lined them all up and opened them one at a time. It was pretty cool. Wrote my dissertation, and all my kids got a copy. So this is what it's about. As teachers, these are things that you have to know. You have to know these things. You have to understand that your job is to educate, to change the lives of people. Every time you go into the classroom, you are bringing something new to the table. In order to do that, you got to know who you are, right? It goes back to the legacy thing. You got to be fearless. Know what your objectives are. Take that kind of leap of faith. And don't stop until you get to where you need to go. Because you're going to have student after student after student after student after student throughout your careers that are going to be thinking about what you taught them on a daily basis. Do you want to be that teacher that everybody forgot? Or do you want to be that teacher that everybody remembers? Everybody's got a teacher like that, right? Who was yours? Who was yours?
My English teacher.
Who was yours?
History teacher. English teacher. History teacher.
History teacher.
English teacher. Dance teacher.
Yep. We all have that teacher. I told you about Mr. Leary. I don't know if I ever would have done anything if I didn't know how to read. Jeez, is it luck or not? Indian people believe not. No such thing as luck. One of the interesting things is I still have people contacting me from 20 years ago that I had as students. Best feeling in the world, eh? Having a student come back and tell you that you made a difference in their life. Like Mr. Leary, bowling alley.